I'd like to turn the podium over to you, if I would, and please welcome Dr. Randolph from the University of Utah.
My goodness, what a thrill to be with you here this morning. It's great to be back in southern Utah. I spent many of my developmental days here. My mother was from southern Utah, and she used to bring me down here every summer to ride horses. And as I recall, when I first started coming, there was no freeway going through the gap here in the mountain, and this is where we would spend our time along the riverbank with our horses. So growth is certainly a constant here in this state. Can I start by just thanking you for your service? It is remarkable what you do for our state. You help us thrive. You help all of our families grow. You create a place that people want to be. So if we don't tell you enough, thank you very, very, very much. I have with me today members of my cabinet. I wanted them to come and interact with you today. They're over at this table if you do get a moment. I've got my Senior Vice President, Mitzi Montoya, Jason Perry with Governmental Affairs, Marianne Villarreal, and of course Natalie Gochner, who many of you know. But we came down here today to spend some time understanding a lot of Utah's problems. As you know, my goal is to create a university that has unsurpassed societal impact, and that means listening. Listening to the issues that face our state, listening and trying to help come up with solutions. One of the amazing things I get to do every day is hang out with some really, really smart people. And they have some amazing ideas about how the world might get better. But what we lack is an interface with you and the people on the ground that have the real expertise of how human beings work and what they need to thrive in our society. And so we're spending a lot of time listening so that we can match the capabilities we have on our campus with what you need in your community. So I'm raising my hand here today to help. If you need us, if you think we can help, we're here for you, and I think we're getting better at it. It is certainly my pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker today, and I want to give you a little bit of background how we got to know Tim at the University of Utah. One of the problems I face on a campus is, I would say, a lack of an ability to dialogue intelligently. As you know, universities are often lightning rods of places where ideas clash, and we began to realize that this problem is getting in the way of learning. And one of our fundamental core values that we're trying to establish at our university is a way to interact with people with different values with incredible dignity. But the problem is we couldn't figure out how to do it. Until one day, Tammy Pfeiffer and Tim Shriver walked into my conference room, and within 5 minutes, I knew I had most of the answers sitting in front of me. This was a group of people that had formed. Tim has formed a group called Unite, which is really focusing on bringing people together to have positive interactions, even though they don't agree and may never agree, with a common belief that in some ways, if we can treat each other with dignity, we will move our human condition forward. And I became inspired by him and what he does and what this means. And I have watched them bring their ideas to our campus and transform individuals that could barely sit in rooms together, right, into friends that still disagree, but actually are able to move our campus forward in productive ways. Tim has a remarkable background. He's the chairman of Special Olympics International. His mother founded the organization. But frankly, he's a husband, he's a father, he's a grandfather, he's a person who deeply cares about humanity. When he sees a problem, he raises his hand, he organizes and tries to move people together forward. In fact, I love this quote by him: to inspire people, don't show them your superpowers, show them theirs. Please welcome Tim Shriver.
Thank you so much, President Randall. Thank you for welcoming me to the university. Thank you for welcoming me to the state, to your students, your leadership team, all of whom are here. I want to thank Cameron Deal, and Mayor Silvestrini. Thank you for allowing me to have a moment here. You know, I'm born and bred in Boston, Massachusetts. I come from maybe a political family, some might say, and it's not often that you think you're going to get invited to the Utah League of Cities and Towns. That's why I wore a tie, by the way, and you can tell there's both red and blue in my tie. I thought this whole thing through. I didn't know the president was going to show up in shirt sleeves, but if I'd known that, I would have tried. Well, I know many of you are, but it really is a special privilege for me, and I like very much what President Randall and others have said here to thank you for your service. I know you have many titles: mayor, commissioner, board members, leaders of different sorts and types, and leadership is often the title associated with you, but what I keep hearing this morning is servants, public servants, servant leaders, the idea that your primary vocation, and we need to be restoring and creating pride around this vocation. People have vocations in their faith traditions. They have vocations in their professional roles. This is a vocation. You are fulfilling a vocation, not just to your communities, but to our country. And it's a real huge honor for me to get a few minutes of your time to try to share ideas that I hope can be helpful to you as you serve the communities that are so important to you and your families. So thank you for that. I grew up, my dad gave a speech towards the end of his life at the 30th anniversary of the Peace Corps, and he ended the speech by saying, "Serve, serve, serve, for it is the servants who will save us all." So I grew up with this idea that what you guys are all doing is really critically important. And then a few years ago, I wrote this book. Don't worry, I'm not pitching the book. It's not here, it's not for sale. You can't, well, maybe not out of print. You can get it if you really want it. But I was doing a tour to promote the book when it first came out, and I was in a southern state in the elevator of a hotel getting ready to go up to the conference, the room where all the meeting rooms are, the floor where all the meeting rooms are, and I got in the elevator, and there was a guy with a 10-gallon hat and cowboy boots, blue jeans, big silver belt buckle, about 6'5", and he looks over at me. I push the mezzanine button. He says, "Anyone ever tell you you look like a Kennedy?" And I was kind of nervous and anxious and all that kind of, as I was thinking about what I was going to say. And I was like, my ride was short. I said, yeah, I've heard that before. And he says, "Well, that must really piss you off, eh?" It was not in Utah. But if you're thinking that, no, just kidding. I know you're not thinking that. But I think what's interesting about that little anecdote is just how quickly human beings, all of us, how quickly we see the cover of the book, we attach a label to the cover, and then so frequently we sort good, bad, right, wrong, mine, yours, like, don't like, without even a sentence's worth of understanding or conversation. How quickly we are to sort and pigeonhole. I grew up, I want to share just a few stories of my childhood because I hope they're relevant to you today. I grew up hearing and thinking that my primary job, that our primary job, our family's job, was to reduce the power of stigma, hatred, and contempt in our culture. The first lesson I got in it was in my own backyard. This is a picture of my mom. I was probably 4 years old when this picture was taken in the backyard. We had a swimming pool where she invited into our backyard during the summer 100 children with intellectual disabilities, almost all of whom came from institutions, almost all of whom carried labels in their lives that are almost too painful to mention today. Almost all of whom were given up many times in infancy. Why? Because doctors would tell moms, mostly moms and dads, get rid of this child. This child is a burden. This child, forget about it. You go back to your other children. You go back to building your family. Give up. They're too different. And my mother's vocation her whole life, she'd grown up with a sister with an intellectual challenge. Her vocation her whole life was to end the pernicious power of that label and that stigma and that assumption. And she said, you bring your children, there's no summer camp for your children, bring them to my house. And in 1962, her brother was the President of the United States, but she was in the backyard teaching children with intellectual disabilities to swim. Why? Because she wanted to replace those labels, which I won't mention because they're painful, with the label like athlete, champion. She went on to found the Special Olympics movement some 6 years after this picture was taken, and made the audacious claim that those we had separated ourselves from, those who were society's least desirable, were Olympic. Yeah, Olympic. And you know, if we're honest, the audacity of that branding, we talk about branding, President Randall, you guys all brand your cities, your towns, your departments, public safety, want to build our brand. Imagine the audacity of taking the child who has been removed, put behind concrete walls 12 feet high for life, and saying it's an Olympic champion. Look at her run. Look at her bravery. There was some powerful message I was hearing very early in my life, that there was a gap here, and that to serve was to see the person who has been excluded, to see the other with dignity. And if I can say, after 25, almost 30 years in the Special Olympics movement, if I can say the lesson those athletes like that little boy there have taught me, it's that when you give me the chance to be seen with dignity, watch out the gifts I have. Be prepared to see, as one of our athletes said, if you want to know what to label me, Gabrielle Clark in Australia, label me able. You know, let me show you what I can do. When we remove the blinders and the distortions that contempt and hatred and fear create. My dad was up to the same thing. This is a picture, again, same year, 1962. My dad was invited to come to Washington and launch a government agency. No blueprint, no org chart, no appropriation, no authorization. A presidential phone call that said, I've got this idea that I gave in a speech, he said to my dad, can you come start a government agency? And within a year, the United States Peace Corps was the most popular agency of the United States government in 1962. And why? Because young people were being asked not to go just build schools, not to go just dig wells, not to go plan community centers, but to go meet people eye to eye. My dad would say this over and over again. Peace Corps volunteers, you go to learn the language. Think of this in the context of our time. Learn the language of the person you don't know. Understand the culture of the person who lives an ocean away from you. Don't fear the foreigner. Meet, live, learn, build bonds of common humanity. And these young Americans, and they're still doing it today, have that same mandate and believed in it so deeply that we still have the United States Peace Corps, and it's still, against all odds, educates Americans and people around the world about one major thing. Yes, they build schools, yes, they dig wells, yes, they grow crops, but mostly they grow a sense of our common humanity. So when I was a young teacher, I read this quote from the prophet Isaiah. Many of you will know this. I know it's not necessarily exactly an LDS text, but I think we have enough familiarity with the Hebrew scriptures to remember that the prophet Isaiah has this beautiful selection about clothing the naked and feeding the hungry and loosing the bonds of oppression. And at the end of that long, beautiful invitation to serve is this line. If you do all these things, you will be called a repairer of the breach, a healer of the breach. And for me, this became a kind of an organizing idea. Where's the breach in our lives? Where are we struggling? Where's the gap? Who's on the other side of the tracks of our metaphorical worlds? Who are we being called to serve that we have been broken away from? Where are the breaches of our current world that are ours to repair? The prophet doesn't say, if you do all these things, we'll have better service delivery. He doesn't say we'll equalize incomes. I'm not saying he didn't believe in those things, or did. But the prophetic wisdom here, I think, is valuable to us because at some level, we've got a big breach in our country today. We classify it in our work as quite simply the problem of a cultural addiction to contempt. These are strong words. They come from my fellow impact scholar. By the way, I've never been a scholar my whole life, but I come to Utah and I get to be a scholar. It's like fantastic. I tell my siblings, they're like, yeah, you can lord it over us. But it's so much fun. But anyway, Arthur Brooks, who's also an impact scholar at the university, has written about this topic of our cultural addiction to contempt. And what most people think when they see this is, you're right. The other side has an addiction to contempt. But it's not an accident. Here's Matt Taibbi's book and some of the also work from Arthur Brooks. There is a business, I'm sorry to say this because it'll sound like I'm being contemptuous of people, but there is a business strategy in our culture designed to make you hate other people. It is not an accident that we are as divided as we are. As Taibbi writes, the goal of much of this outrage industrial complex is to systematically pry families apart. Now, when you turn on the news tonight, or you read the local news, you're not thinking you're getting a version of force-fed contempt. You think you're getting the news. But what we're starting to see is that the powers behind the political and media and algorithmic structures are actually upgrading contempt and hatred all the time in order to make you optimally afraid and optimally angry. And we don't think we're angry. We think we're angry because of the real stuff that's going on, what those people are doing. But it's not an accident. I think that's the main point we want to make here. Charles Koch wrote this in the Deseret News just last year, a major funder of political action. And he owned some responsibility for this. The way in which we're funding political campaigns is creating not a zero-sum game, not an expanding pie, but a negative-sum game. We're designing the system to make it impossible to solve problems. And so when we say, I don't think we can solve problems, it's because the system is designed to stop us. Now, I'm not saying that there's no culpability here, but I am saying that the cultural addiction to contempt is not a victimless action. Amanda Ripley, the brilliant journalist, has studied this issue around the world and has reached the conclusion, based on all of the science and all the polling, that the language of contempt precipitates violence. It is not an accident that we have increases in violence, both self-inflicted violence and intergroup violence. When you have the outrage industrial complex teaching this, it ends up putting the country in a situation where we're sick and we're stuck and we're falling apart. 1 in 4 of us in this room, let's say we have 400 people, that would mean 100 of us, if the statistics are right, have ended a relationship in our own families over political contempt. Uncle George is no longer welcome at our Thanksgiving table. I love my niece, but I don't talk to her anymore. I haven't talked to her in 2 years. My mom, her opinions, I just can't stand it anymore. That's the voice of Americans crying out in loneliness and anger and hostility, and have come to believe that their political conviction is more important than the most important relationships in their lives, their family. That's a rough place to land. It shouldn't surprise us that 1 in 4 of us suggest that it may be soon necessary to take up arms. 25% of Americans. This data from just last week, for the first time, I know it's a little bit hard to see, but the chart on the left shows that in this recent Pew poll, for the first time, more than half of Americans do not believe that we can solve our problems. 56% of Americans. If you ask me, one message I was raised with is that Americans can solve their problems. Americans can solve, we can solve any problem. When we put our minds to it, we can do it. Today, for the first time, almost 2/3, 56% of us say, not gonna happen. And on the right, you see even in some ways more discouraging data. It's that almost, I think it's 72, let me see if I get the number just right. 76% of Americans have not much trust or none at all in the wisdom of their fellow Americans. 76% of us don't believe that the rest of the country, the rest of their fellow Americans have any wisdom to offer the future. So, enough bad news. I'm not here to bring bad news, I'm here to bring hope. Our belief is that if contempt is the problem, and I want to make this clear, we're distinguishing contempt from every other issue. We're not talking immigration, we're not talking pro-life, pro-choice, we're not talking tax rates, we're not talking education, I'm not talking about any other political conviction anyone in this room has, or I have. I'm talking simply about a new issue that's alongside those issues, but distinct from it, the issue of how we treat each other when we disagree. The cultural addiction to contempt. We believe there's an antidote, and the antidote is as old as human literature, as old as human religion, as old as human culture. Treating others with dignity. Not dignity they earn because they're in our party, or from our town, or from our state, or from our faith-based tradition, or anything like that. Just inherent God-given dignity. Treat the person with whom you disagree with dignity. That's our premise. We believe, and we've studied this, I'd say quite a lot, not enough probably, but if division is caused by contempt, not by difference of opinion, see the distinction? Division is caused because they want to build a wall and I don't want to build a wall. No, that's disagreement. Division is caused by hatred and contempt. So if division is caused by contempt, we can, and dignity is the antidote to contempt, we believe that we can unite around this one core principle. But now you all are in politics, and every time we get to this point in the discussion with a political life of some sort or another, political leaders will say, well, that's all fine and well, but that's not what works. Negative campaigning works. You should see what works for fundraising. You know who raises the most money in Congress? The most hateful congressional leaders. The most contemptuous, the most sneering leaders raise the most money. It doesn't work. Emmanuel Cleaver said this to us, we got this quote from him a few years ago. There are agencies that monitor political figures for almost everything. How many of you have had to fill out a survey that says, what's your voting record going to be on this issue, on water rights, on highways, on schools? You have to answer all these questions, but nobody asks you. Nobody measures you. Nobody challenges you on whether you treat others with dignity, right? So we said, okay, given this logic sequence, let's take a shot at that. Let's see if we can measure how people treat each other when they disagree. So we have this challenge in front of us. We want to ease divisions because people don't flourish when they're divided. It's emotionally and physically and politically actually horrible. We want to prevent violence. No one wants violence to be our primary problem-solving strategy. And we want to actually get to the point where we solve problems rather than fighting about them, as Mr. Koch said in his text. So here's the I'm going to give you the short version. Here's the whole thing. Normally we take a long time, but I know you don't want to spend a long time on this. This is the whole dignity index on one slide. Now I know that the print is a little small, But here's what you got to know. When you get down to the bottom, I disagree with President Randall about the legislation being proposed on X or Y or Z. But I got to tell you, he's not even human. We've got to get rid of the guy. He's dangerous to us. Let's have a strategy meeting. He's got to go. Whatever it takes, gang. That's a 1. You start to move up the ladder, and the hostility decreases, but only a little bit. It's us, it's me or Randall. Maybe it's just a deep fight when you get up to 3, me versus Randall. Maybe when you get up to 4, I don't trust him, but we'll figure out how to manage him. But you start to move up the ladder, and maybe you can just think about this in your own families, talking to your spouses or your children. When was the last time you got into a significant disagreement with someone close to you? Was your first response, they have a right to be heard? Let me sit down and listen, that's a 5. Or was it a 6? You know, when we talk to the other side, we grow, I start to learn a little bit about them. Maybe there are values there. Or was it a 7? We're in this together, Randall, you and me. We don't agree, but we're going to find a way to find common ground. That's my mission. Or is it an 8? As much as we disagree, I still see you as carrying the same humanity I carry, and I will always treat you that way. Our view is that this scale, as simple and as deceptively kind of, in a way, easy. I hope you're seeing it as, oh yeah, I recognize that, or yeah, maybe I did a 3 last week, or when I talk about Democrats from Massachusetts, yeah, I kind of say they're 2s, and you know, whatever, I'm just kidding. But that you'll notice in your own thinking, for most of us, this is an exceptional room, I know, but for most of us, we notice in our own thinking a lot of 2s and 3s. A lot of we're the good people, they're the bad people. It's our values that will save the country, theirs that will destroy it. It's us or them. And the goal of the index isn't to tell you what you should think about any political issue. It's just to add one. Have the strength of your convictions. Be passionate about what you believe in. In a university setting, pursue the ideas with the vigor and all the energy you've got through research, through scholarship, through study, through inquiry. Make your claims. Yes, we want that. That's democracy. But also, treat people with dignity. The problem-solving method that we have come to conclude is the only one is contempt. It's not the problem-solving method that works. That's our premise. Let me just show you this quickly in 1 or 2 quick examples. Here's a 1. I mentioned the 1. I should have said Randall was treating me as a 1 instead of the other way around. But this is very tough and painful. This is when culture has collapsed. And here's a couple of examples. This is a couple of quotes here from the rhetoric that preceded by hours the Rwandan genocide. We need to take responsibility for ourselves and wipe out this scum. If you don't fight and kill, they're going to kill you. Now, I'm sorry to say, I can find rhetoric like this in the United States today. And here you have Heinrich Himmler at the height of the Holocaust saying he doesn't care whether he starves people, kills people outright. It's our culture that matters. Everybody else, out of the way. Destruction is our method. Violence is our problem-solving strategy. Now, I put this up as an example only so you will see how close we get when we say it's us or them. Us versus them. Us versus them. Go up to the other end of the spectrum and you get beautiful texts like this. This is Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the Nobel Prize-winning Archbishop of South Africa, Episcopalian Archbishop of South Africa, who just died about a year and a half ago. who lived through apartheid, who lived through and built the Truth and Reconciliation healing process in that country. And he says here, you can read it for yourself, what I've looked into the face of monsters and I believe that there, but for the grace of God go I. And then these beautiful words. I've sat with condemned men on death row. I've spoken with former police officers who've admitted to inflicting the cruelest torture. Child soldiers committing acts of nauseating depravity. And I recognize in them a depth of humanity that's a mirror of my own. He doesn't excuse the behavior. He just says, I see you. We are in this in some ways. We both have the same God-given dignity. And that inspires not an excuse for principles that violate yours, but a respect for the dignity of the person, no matter what. So, a quick story. President Randall mentioned we walked into his office about a year ago. We expected to be talking about scholarship and things like that, and within about 7 minutes, we had a plan to pilot this index in Utah. We did it last spring. These are the students at the U who we trained. We had all the science come in and evaluate whether could you use this without bias. A lot of people say, it's gonna be biased. It's going to be Democrats judging Republicans, or Republicans judging Democrats, or woke people judging conservative, or vice versa. No, we did the science. We purged the grading system of bias. We trained graders who could grade regardless of whether they were grading Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden. They could grade them the same, just on the basis of how much dignity or how much contempt in the language. These are our rock stars of our movement. This is almost like our Continental Congress. These are our founding pioneers. We released scores last fall. Some of you may have seen this in the air. It got a lot of coverage in your state. We scored the congressional races and the Senate race, got lots of coverage. It got picked up nationally. This is the 6,000-word Politico piece. I got to get a different screenshot of this, but it's better because the real person being featured here is Tammy Pfeiffer, who's in the front row. And it's a beautiful piece. I highly recommend it to you, whether or not you have any more interest in this. Read the piece in Politico about Tammy's heroic mission and example and witness in the state of Utah. Yeah, good to know. But it got picked up in other national publications. This is a Washington Post columnist writing in the online journal The Bulwark about the importance of this. Here's a piece that ran in the Dallas Morning News. None of this was pitched by us, by the way. It's just journalists starting to see that we've got a problem. That we can't ignore this problem. We can't pretend like all we're going to do is work on fighting on the policy issues, which we're currently fighting on. Have at it. Go for it. Not trying to stop any of that. But we've got to address this issue. And as the Dallas Morning News says, speech score could help civilize political debate. So we learned a lot in Utah. Utah is our founding state. This is the home of the Dignity Index. We learned that the index works. We learned that leaders are hungry for it, and you can be the judge of that in your own sense here. We also learned something I think very powerful, what we call the mirror effect. Those kids I showed you the picture of, mostly what they were interested in was not judging political debate. Mostly what they became interested in was using the index for themselves. They said, one student said to me the other day, I just unfriended somebody yesterday on Facebook, and I called them a name. It was the opposite political party. I said, you're a Republican, Democrat, you can imagine, and you're not a nice word. And she said to me, I'm going to go take that post down. I didn't need to say that. Simple. They love people that have had a little bit of familiarity, love the idea of using it for themselves. I'm almost done. Tammy's telling me I'm out of time. And the fourth point here is that a lot of young people, and maybe you see this in your constituencies, a lot of people are discouraged. They're discouraged about the politics, so they've tuned it out. They're discouraged about the media, so they've disconnected from it. Young people in particular. I mean, if you ask young people when was the last time they watched the news on television, most of them will tell you they haven't watched in 5 years. They just cut it off. They feel like there's nothing they can do. this little tool gave people a sense that we can do something. We met with students again last night. They're organizing Students for Dignity on the campus. They want to take it to other campuses. They want to organize dignity debates on hot button issues, encouraging students to learn how to debate and showing them how to debate. They want to organize trips to the state legislature to meet with legislators, ask them to address each other. So they're fired up. They think, wow, we got something we can get done here. We still have the final challenge there at the bottom. You may be thinking in your mind, wait a minute, I am not going to compromise my principles. I'm going to hold those people accountable. I'm going to oppose what they're doing. And if I have to use contempt, I'm going to use it. If I call them deplorable, that's because they are deplorable. People are still holding on to the idea that in order to fulfill their hopes and dreams and values, they have to treat other people with hatred and contempt. Not true, but we're all kind of addicted to it. So breaking an addiction is still hard. So you say, you illuminate the problem, you challenge people. How do you actually change people? There's one simple premise hidden in here. You change people by introducing them to their own goodness. It's almost the opposite of what we instinctively do. If I disagree with you, my first set of responses is to attack you, argue against you, embarrass you, expose you, surround you with people that don't agree with you, organize a group against you. And it doesn't work. It doesn't change people. It doesn't change people. Read the greatest literature in the midst of the Holocaust. Read the greatest literature of faith-based leaders. What do they come back to saying over and over again? They say just like Tutu said. In the other, I see myself. Love my friend, love my neighbor, I love my enemy. That's the way to change people. We need in our culture, from our point of view, and we think this is shared by the vast majority of Americans, the chance to actually heal, like I would say, it is un-American to hate other Americans. We just can't get where we want to go as a country by hating each other. Never could, never have. Almost every mistake we've made as a country has been based on the fact that we somehow misguided our hatred and fear and contempt against each other instead of trying to solve problems. So we want to build the dignity movement. We want those students at the University of Utah to get colleagues and friends in city halls and legislatures around the state. We're going to build these coder cores around the state. We're going to get AI tools that you could use to release a score on your own social media posts or on your own speeches or on your own hearings. We're going to build an online community of people who are willing to challenge their elected officials and the media, not challenge them on the issue, but challenge them on contempt. If you get that email, which you're all on mailing lists from fundraisers, I'm guessing, right? And when you get the email that calls the other party a series of names, write back, I am no longer giving to you if you send me emails that treat other people with hatred. I'll give to you, it might be your cause, but not if you treat the other party or your opponent with hatred and contempt. As soon as we do that, they're not going to use it anymore. Everybody if this room only didn't give to any public fundraising appeal that used contempt, we would start a revolution. I really believe that. So, we're going to have time for conversation. I'm going to get Natalie up here, who always gets us going and challenges me and brings out wonderful points. But I want to lead you. I've noticed in this work just over the last year, people get discouraged quickly, think it's not possible. Actually, it's just not possible to treat other people who have done horrible things or who are doing horrible things with dignity. And my role model on this is Scarlett Lewis. This is Scarlett with her little boy, Jesse. Jesse was killed in the Sandy Hook school massacre some years ago at the age of 6. And Scarlett, like other moms and dads who have suffered this almost unimaginable tragedy, tried to figure out how to rebuild her life afterwards. And she was pitched by political forces on both sides of the political debate. Join with us, join with us. We're going to use this Sandy Hook tragedy, your tragedy, for political purposes. And she decided to do something else. She decided to create a curriculum. And it's called the Choose Love curriculum. And it's taught as part of social and emotional development programs in many, many cities and states around the country. Choose Love. And she dedicates this curriculum to her little boy, to Jesse, and she also dedicates it to Adam Lanza, the guy who took her son's life. Because her view is that if Adam had been treated with love and dignity, maybe her little boy would still be alive. Now, most of us don't have the strength, the faith, the courage to treat the person who takes the life of our own child with dignity. But Scarlett, she does. So I'm not asking myself, I'm not asking any of you to go that far. But the baby steps we can do. We can treat each other when we disagree on whether the levy should be X or Y, or whether it should be 6% or 8%. We can treat the other person with dignity. When the governor says something you agree with or don't agree with, or senator or the congressman of either party, I mean, mostly I know it's one party here, but nonetheless, there are differences here within the party. And we've seen it. Hatred, contempt, vitriol, personal attacks. It's not us. It's not us. So I hope the Dignity Index can help us become the best of us. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. All right, so I'm Natalie Bachner. I lead the Kim C. Gardner Policy Institute at the University of Utah, and Tim Shriver's an Impact Scholar with the U. And I got to ask you some questions, Tim. But first, thank you so much for that message. Can we give him one more hand? Just amazing. So you spent all day pretty much in Salt Lake City and on the campus of the University of Utah yesterday. You met with community leaders, you met with students, you met with our health leaders, with the university health system. What gives you hope about Utah?
Well, I think, at one of our meetings, Natalie, I can't remember who said it, but they said, what Utah is really great at is when it sees a good idea, it brings everybody together to make it come to life. Now, I can't say that from someone who's lived here, but I have this sense here that this combination of issues, this commitment to deep value propositions, maybe it comes from the legacy of the faith-based traditions here in the state, but there's a deep commitment here, I think, a deep openness to a politics, to a public discourse grounded in the value of loving your neighbor and loving even your enemy. Treating everyone with dignity. That's number one. Number two, there's a can-do spirit here. I mean, the state is growing because people are excited about living here. The economy's good. There's a sense of creativity and possibility here. Nature is beautiful. And there's a sense here in which kind of a passionate pragmatism can work. I'd say a lot of places, as I said earlier, I think people have given up. I don't think that's the case here. I think people are struggling. And I think there is a lot of pain and there's a lot of frustration with political discourse, but people haven't given up. So I think that's really remarkable. And I think you've got extraordinary resources, both in the universities and in the communities here. A sense of service that, yes, this is a room of public servants, but it seems like everywhere I go here, someone just came back from their mission or just came back from their work at the homeless shelter, or just came back from volunteering at the school. There is a sense still here of the urgency and importance of service. I think you put those together, you've got a really potential platform here for making a difference, not just for Utah, but for the country.
Yeah, well, very good. I've got all these questions that have come in, and one of the questions that came in, and this is relatively to the audience, but a visual for you. How many people in this room served in the Peace Corps, a religious service mission, or some other form of service that took you away from home, and asking you to stand?
That's a nice idea.
Let's see what we got here.
Stand up if you've not that.
Is that something? Yeah. So,
Thank you.
Here's a question, Tim. Civility and dignity in politics continues to get worse, especially on a national level. What can we do as local officials to make a national impact?
Well, there's a lot of difference of opinion as to whether national leaders lead or follow. And there's Howard Gardner, the scholar, has a book on leadership where he makes a distinction between, I think the words are traditional leaders and innovative leaders. Traditional leaders tell people, amplify the story that's current in the culture. So we're all angry about whatever it is, pick a subject, and the traditional leader will remind you of your anger, help you channel it, force you to push it forward. The innovative leader finds the story that's latent in the culture, that's hidden beneath the surface, and brings it to life. It's not a story that's missing. It's the story that's just beneath the surface. So I think what we can do is recognize that Americans in your communities and towns, Utahns, are starving for an alternative. Give that voice. Look at the room here, full of people who stood up. Give them voice. When somebody's toxic in political discourse, don't hate them. Remind them that you're there to listen to them and you are committed to their dignity. Give the latent voice of Americans who want to be compassionate, who want to be of service, who want to be healers, who want to bring the country to a better place. Give that voice, amplify it. The national leaders will get the picture. You've got leaders that run the spectrum on this issue. I don't have to name names. You know your leaders much better than I do. And maybe some of you have found yourselves trapped in becoming more contemptuous and hateful. I don't point the finger at you. I just say, maybe this is the moment where we can say we're going to change. So I think what we can do is we can create a groundswell from the bottom up that demands change, maybe first from our elected officials, rewards those who treat others with dignity, and then start to get the message out. We can help with that. Social media is very powerful on this. Repost things where your constituents and your colleagues and your leaders treat each other with dignity. Find the stories of the person who disagrees, who treats the other person with dignity, and amplify it. Don't find the story of the person who's really hateful about this issue or that, really angry. Say, I agree with her. He's right. You may be getting the issue for it, but you're destroying the country. Don't do that.
The issue of citizenship has come up in one of the questions, and the local leader is saying, we're civic leaders. How do we urge people to see themselves as citizens and not just consumers of local government? So it's this call to citizenship at the local level.
Well, I think everybody wants to be called. Anybody here a parent? I'm sure there's a lot of parents in the room. Remember your 4-year-old? Mommy, I want to do it. I want to help. Remember your 6-year-old when you asked him to go out and help you with the tools in the shed? Oh, I'm helping Dad. I'm helping. I'm contributing. It's in all of us. This is you don't have to listen to it from me. Look at your own life. If the president got up here afterwards and says, I need 4 or 6 of you to come help me do X or Y or Z, you want me? Really? You want me to come down to Salt Lake and help? So we're all eager to be called. Ask them. My family has this, we had this story, and maybe you've heard President Kennedy in his inaugural address famously says, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And you'd think he was inventing the idea that political leaders should ask their people, don't tell you what you're giving them. I'm giving you a better tax rate, I'm giving you better housing, I'm giving you better schools, I'm giving you better roads, I'm giving you better snow plowing. Fine, do all that for your constituents. But also ask them. Ask them, they want to be asked. So if you don't want people just to be consumers of municipal services and have a transactional relationship with you, change the transaction and make it human. Invite them in.
Okay, this is a little bit unfair. I know the answer to this because I spent a good part of the day with you yesterday, but we've had some people ask. The LDS prophet recently spoke at the LDS General Conference about being a peacemaker. Have you read the talk? What do you think?
Not only have I read it, but I've reposted it on our Dignity Index account, and I've talked, so first of all, as another leader in the LDS community said to me recently, he did everything for you but mention the Dignity Index. And I think that's, I mean, he shouldn't have mentioned, I'm not saying he should have, but the talk is a beautiful combination of seeing the moment and the conflict and the toxins in the moment, seeing the humanity that can be its counterweight, and locating the thread of the humanity in the faith-based tradition. What I think the president did was remind us that in our faith traditions, as he said, we have an exhortation not just to judge good and bad people. That's really not our job. I mean, your job, as I read, I'm not in the LDS community, so I don't mean to be presumptuous here, but in most traditions, the primary job of the person of faith is not to go around judging everybody. The primary job is to go around loving people. I think that's what he said.
Tim, I have some questions here about navigating extremism. And this is so difficult
Yeah.
because the incentives are aligned to reward extremism. Do you have advice for local officials? I got the stat here, this is phenomenal. There are 1,434 elected officials, local government elected officials in Utah. Over 1,400, that's almost 1,000 more than Congress.
Right.
And you've got a good share of them here. How do you navigate extremism?
Well, you know, if this were a classroom, I'd ask anyone who identifies as an extremist to quietly send me a text and answer that question. My sense of extremists is mostly that they're people who feel desperately unseen and unheard and don't know how and don't believe anyone cares about what they care about. So they've given up. So they become either emotionally or culturally or physically violent. I go back to Greg Boyle, how do you change them? Mirror to them their own goodness. I mean, look, there's people that are, like I worked for a long time in education, I still do. The idea of teaching children social skills and emotional skills seems to me to be very common sense. Many people now, maybe many people in this room, seriously oppose what has become the work that I've done with my life. I want to hear from them. I mean, what am I going to go around saying you're nuts? Who's that going to help? It's not going to help kids. So I think we have to have a conversation, even with extremists, even with people who now, of course, many people who are extremists, I mean, very few people walk around with a big t-shirt on saying I'm an extremist. They don't see themselves that way. They don't want to have conversations. They block dialogue. They resist encounter. So it's not easy. And I don't think you should compromise. If I have strong beliefs that children learn more by being taught empathy or being taught how to self-regulate, I want to be able to try to convince you of that. You may say, I don't agree with you. Let's have that conversation. Don't compromise your principles, even in the face of extremist opposition. But I think whenever possible, ask to meet, ask to listen. It's not the quick solution, by the way. Dignity is not short-term work. You got to look at the horizon a little longer. Maybe that's why prophets think this way, because they don't have a short-term horizon. You know, if you're trying to solve the problem by Friday at close of business, it's not going to work. It's not going to be as easy to do it the way we're describing. But if you want to really solve the problem, try to get a chance to listen. At the bottom of their story is probably a scared, unseen person in pain. And if you can find that person and you can express the part of you that's that person, then you start to be able to build a different kind of conversation.
Have you found in your research that contempt is addictive?
Yes.
Okay, we'll go to the next question.
All my answers are usually long, so maybe I'll stick with a short one on that. Yes. And if there's a follow-up question, I'm happy to try to play with that.
Well, here's the follow-up. Cable news and its connection to all of this.
There's no question that what cable news, well, first of all, I don't even like the term cable news because it doesn't matter what side you're on here. I know some people love Fox and some people love MSNBC. Neither of them are news. Neither of them are news. Neither of them are news. It's a powerful blend of information, entertainment, and opinion. That's okay. Maybe good television, but it's not news. It may be entertaining, it may be reinforcing something that you like to be entertained about. There's a lot of things that are entertaining that are not necessarily accurate, but it's not news. So they have a business model that's grounded in what I called earlier this outrage industrial complex. It works for a small number of people. It creates talking points. It creates a sense of safety. You know, if you watch one of those every night, my guess is when you're watching, you feel validated. Nothing wrong with that. Everybody should belong. Not everyone's going to belong to the same group. What cable television has done is try to teach you that in order to belong to your group, you have to hate another group. You don't. You can belong to your town, you can belong to your state, you can belong to your faith tradition, you can belong to the Lions Club, you can belong to the sisters of this or the brothers of that, belong to all those things. You just don't have to hate the other group. You don't have to. I mean, we have thousands of years of wars of religion by people who said, I belong to this tradition, I'm going to kill people in the other. You don't have to do that. You don't have to kill people in the other tradition. So the problem with this model is that it's grounded in making us feel belonging by reinforcing what we think we believe, by making us hate other people. So it's addictive because you get more and more scared of the other group, more and more dependent on getting the information that will protect you from the other group.
More fear.
And more fear, yeah.
Yeah. Tim, here's a comment or a question. I was moved by your comment, look at her run. Can you share a little more on the transformational impact of removing barriers, showing compassion and love?
The comment I said,
That you made about look at her run during the Special Olympics.
Yes. So I think it's fair to say that most of us are afraid to have a child with an intellectual disability. If you have one, or if you have a brother or sister or uncle or aunt, you might remember the pre-story. You're afraid. I hope this doesn't happen, right? Intellectual disability was defined by medicine in the early part of the 20th century according to an IQ test, 2 standard deviations below the mean, the statistics people here know. So your IQ is low by that measure. You don't want to have a low IQ. Nobody here wakes up in the morning and says, oh, I hope I can have a low IQ. So you don't want what they are at some unconscious level. So what the Special Olympics movement does is make you feel comfortable easing those fears for a second or two. Because you meet. You're not meeting someone with a low IQ, you're not meeting someone with a genetic condition, you're meeting Sally. And then you get to watch Sally line up, 10 races here. You get to imagine 12-year-old Sally at that starting line. And if she's a normal American at 12 years old, let's say with Down syndrome, she's never been to a birthday party in her life. She's not going to the U. And when she was born, the pediatrician or the obstetrician said, I'm sorry. Childcare is hard to find, schools aren't necessarily welcoming. And there she stands at the starting line, and she runs her race. And she turns around, she arms are up in the air. Her mom is running out of the stands, coming out and give her a gigantic hug. And some of us will feel, many people tear up when they come to the Special Olympics movement. And I often ask them, but I think at a basic level, what we're seeing is that all these fears I have, I can let go. And she's a good runner, she's a beautiful child, her mom loves her. I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to be afraid. So the easing, you know, as people remind us often in most scriptures, the most common expression, at least in the Judeo-Christian scriptures that I know, most common words in the traditional Bible, they start, be not afraid. I think that's what Special Olympics is all about. It just teaches people don't be afraid of each other.
Beautiful. I think we're going to end right there. I don't have the heart to ask another question. Thank you so much.